Elden Ring is a game that took 300 professional developers, 5 years, and $200 million to develop. And I'm just one guy with $10. Can I make Elden Ring by myself? Probably not, but I'm sure gonna try. I'm gonna be making multiple enemies, a small world to explore, and a cool boss fight. But first, I have to make the player. I started with the Unity third-person character controller, which gives me some basic controls, but Elden Ring has way more. But if there's one control that stands out in Elden Ring, it's the dodge roll. If you aren't rolling around at the speed of sound, perfectly dancing with the boss, you aren't playing the game. So I had to get this perfect. I got a dodge animation from Mixamo, and then added some animation events to it that push you forward in the direction you're moving, in sync with the animation. And this works great. However, the dodge is weird in that it uses the same button as sprinting. So when you hold the sprint button, you'll sprint, but if you just tap it, you'll dodge instead. Well, technically, if you're not holding a direction, you'll just backstep, but no one uses that. To implement this, I just made a timer variable to check how long you've been holding the sprint button for. If it's fast, you'll dodge, but if you keep holding it, you can run. I guess you'll just have to trust me I'm using the same button for this. And just by adding a dodge roll, this is already feeling like Elden Ring. But this scene looks nothing like it. I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I think this scene needs some sprucing up. When you think of the Elden Ring world, what do you see first? That's right, a big tree. There we go. Now my game is indistinguishable from the original. Now we can focus on adding enemies. Elden Ring has a lot of night enemies, so I figured I could save some time by reusing the Shovel Knight model I made from my Blender video. Now, obviously I can't just put Shovel Knight in my game. I had to make some changes to him so Yacht Club Games doesn't take me out. So I changed his coloring and his horns, but don't worry, I left his most important feature. And now, see, it's not Shovel Knight, it's, Eugene. Please don't sue me. I'm already tiptoeing on the edge with FromSoft. So now that I've made a completely original character, I rigged him and added it to my game. Now I want him to have a few attacks, so of course I had to start with a dig attack. I made it so on the swing down it does damage, and when it swings up it spawns multiple rocks that fly at the player. Obviously this animation still needs some work, and it needs to be fair. Most enemies in Elden Ring have a wind up to their attacks. This makes it so you can tell what's about to come and react accordingly. You know, assuming you're not garbage. So while cleaning up the animation, I also added a wind up time. Now it pulls back, then drives into the ground. For variety, I added another attack, which is just a simple swing back and forth. And with the attacks looking passable, I started working on having him walk and run towards the player. This was pretty easy since I could just copy the animations from the player, but syncing the timing was a little tedious. But once I got that, I had to combine everything together so that it actually feels like an enemy. I made a pretty basic animation tree, and did some trial and error with some code, and finally got this. It stands around until you get close, then it will walk towards you. It then has a chance to either start sprinting, or do the rock throw attack. Then, when it gets close, it'll stop and do either a swing attack, or the dig attack. But you might be noticing that these attacks aren't actually doing anything, and that's because we haven't finished setting up the player yet. So now it's time to add the health and stamina bar. I tried my best to copy the Elden Ring UI, and I think it looks passable. If you played Elden Ring, you might be thinking, I'm missing the focus bar, and I'm going to need you to keep that to yourself. The health bar is pretty simple. You get hit, it goes down. The stamina bar was a bit more work, since all of your actions are tied to stamina. So running will decrease it, and once you run out, you aren't able to sprint anymore. Same with dodging. But don't worry, if you stop for a second, it will start to regenerate. I just made another simple timer for this, and tied it to all your actions. I then had to make the dodge roll actually dodge. So I added some invincibility frames. So if a giant boulder is flying at you, you can just dodge and it'll phase right through you. Please don't try this at home. But if you ever do get hurt, Elden Ring has glowing juice you can drink to feel better. But game devs don't really drink juice, so instead I made it a crisp and refreshing white Monster energy drink. But I'm not sponsored and don't need to piss off another company, so it doesn't have a logo. See, it could be a monster, or it could be a Baja Blast. We may never know. I made the UI on the bottom and set up the animations. So now when you want to heal, a whole animation plays of you shotgunning the unbranded drink. But if you don't have any more left, the animation still plays, you just won't heal at all. Speaking of juice, this game doesn't have any. Right now it's lacking in game feel. Getting hit should provide some feedback, but it's not doing anything except making your health bar go down. We need your character to react in any way. So I added a knockback animation that plays when you get hit, and I added some particles to the rock breaking. I then added particles to the drink animation so that it sprays everywhere and has a glowing burst for when the heal actually happens. I also made it so the hit animation will overwrite everything, so if you get hit while trying to heal, it will cancel the healing. I then of course had to add the dying animation, and the classic "you're bad" text that shows up every time you die. I'm sure you'll see this one a lot. And now that we finally have most of the mechanics done, I can start focusing on the player. Elden Ring has an in-depth character creator where you can choose between 10 different classes and can change almost every physical aspect of your character. Well, in my game, you can be blue. Okay fine, maybe you can't be blue. I got this model off of Sketchfab, but I added some personal touches. But they blend in so well, I'm sure you didn't even notice. And now he's almost ready to go. He just needs a weapon, and Elden Ring has plenty to choose from. They have over 300 weapons, most with unique attack animations and some with special weapon arts. In my game, you can have a big sword. Yeah, it's from Naruto. Who are you, the cops? To get the sword working, I had to update the animations again. Since you always want to be holding the sword, I had to make a new animation layer that only affects the arms. This way all animations still play, but with you holding something. Then when you want to heal, I can deactivate that layer so the other animation fully plays. And with the sword all set up, we can finally start attacking. But of course, Elden Ring has a lot of options for fighting. You can light attack, heavy attack, block, parry, summon spirits to fight for you, use magic, and apply status effects like bleed. But everyone online says those last three are cheating, and we don't want people cheating. And I'm not making Sekiro, so I'll skip parrying and blocking too. There we go, that's way more reasonable. I started with the basic attack. Yep, doesn't get much better than that. Then I made a strong attack where you do a cool spin. I got this tied to stamina and added hitboxes, but I still had to set up the enemy to take damage. This wasn't too bad, I just had to copy what I did for the player's health and have it display above the enemy. I made it so the health bar always points at the camera so it's easy to see, but right now nothing happens when it goes below 0. In Elden Ring, the enemies ragdoll when they die, so you can play with their dead bodies. I tried to set up a ragdoll, but it did not go well. You alright over there, buddy? So, instead of learning anything new, I just have them collapse. I also added a blood particle effect, so there's more feedback when you hit them. Now, there's still one key mechanic I haven't added yet. In Elden Ring, if you're looking near an enemy, you can lock onto it and the camera will fix to them and all attacks will point towards them. And I don't know if this is the smartest or dumbest solution I've ever come up with, but I made a cylinder extend from the camera that grows, and whichever enemy it collides with first will be locked onto. This makes the camera stick to them, but my first attempt made it so your character was always in the way. Luckily this was a quick fix, I just had to raise the angle a little. Another small detail that makes a huge difference is the little dot that appears when you lock onto something. To replicate this, I just put another canvas into the scene that is moved to the enemy that's locked onto. I copied the shader to display the circle on top of everything in the scene, so you can always see it. Testing all of this made me realize my character was pulling a Dan Schneider and just locking onto the enemy's feet. But we didn't want that reputation, so I made an empty object to mark the center of the enemy, which is now what we lock onto. Phew, that was a close one. And lastly, I had to make the character always attack in the direction of the enemy it's locked onto. This makes aiming much easier. And with that, I think I've made all the core mechanics, so I can start focusing on just making the maps and more enemies. Elden Ring differs from the other Dark Souls games in that it's an open world, where Dark Souls maps are normally semi-linear mazes. Elden Ring has legacy dungeons that fill the same role, and since I don't have 5 years to make an open world, I'm gonna go with the dungeons. And of course I had to start with the most popular area in every FromSoft game, the Poison Swamp. Normally these areas are by far the worst, filled with obnoxious enemies, slower frame rates, and constant poison damage. Despite the problems, they sure do love putting them in every game, so I figured I had to too. I took inspiration from Dark Souls 3, where the swamp had 3 fires you had to light in order to open the path ahead. To do this, I set up stones that light up when you get close to them, and once all 3 are lit, the wall goes away. I spread these around the map and changed the scenery to be more swamp-like. I'm using the Dreamscape Nature Meadows asset pack for the environment, which is a little over $10, but I already own it, so it's basically free. I then made it so walking in the water slowly does damage to you, but this space was feeling very empty, so I decided to make more enemies to fill the space. For the new enemies, I took the player model, painted it green, and gave it a weapon, and boom, a goblin enemy. I made a few variants of it, one with a spear and one with a bow. I added them and some trees to the scene, and it's really coming together. I then made the next areas, a peaceful forest, and for the final area, I wanted it to feel like an authentic FromSoft final area, so I made it feel super rushed and empty. You can't tell me the Lava World and Ash Kingdom and the other Ash Kingdom feel like they weren't last minute additions. Anyways, mine is a narrow mountain, and when playtesting and dying a few times, I decided now is the perfect time to add bonfires. In Elden Ring, these act as checkpoints, but they also allow you to level up using souls. You get souls from every enemy that you defeat, and you might notice that I haven't added them yet. And it's gonna stay that way. I can't do everything. So these bonfires just light up whenever you get close to them, and when you die next, you'll respawn to that campfire instead of the very beginning. I also made them restore all your health and your unbranded healing liquid. And now that dying isn't such a huge punishment, we can add the classic Elden Ring mechanic: bullshit. You ever cross a seemingly empty path just to get pelted by a massive arrow knocking you off the edge? Yeah, that bullshit. So in my game, I added a bridge where you fight on that if you fall off, you instantly die, and a hill with a big boulder that just takes up the entire path, so you have to dodge perfectly. To round out the game, I added one more enemy: a worm with questionable attacks. And finally, for the main attraction, the final boss fight. Once you scale the mountain, you'll encounter this, just a better version of yourself: Big Papa. When you activate him, his health bar will appear on the main UI. Some of his attacks might look familiar, but he has some cool tricks up his sleeve. And if you finally beat him, you win the game. Oh yeah, I still gotta make that part. I made a simple win screen, but then came the hardest part of this whole game. I had to come up with a name. I couldn't just steal Elden Ring, but I can twist it. So now Elden Ring becomes Old Circles. Yep, doesn't get much better than that. I then made a pause menu that of course doesn't pause the game. That would be too convenient. I finished the game by adding some sounds and publishing it on itch. Go check it out, it's completely free, I won't make any money off of it, so hopefully FromSoft won't hurt me. This was my favorite project in a while, so if you want to see me butcher your favorite game, leave a suggestion below. And I'll see you guys next time.